Well, hello, that's me again. Today is January 3rd, 2025. I hope so, the year is correct. It is 2025. It is Friday. Thank God it's Friday. And what you see in the beginning, these are Russians basically sending the present, this decoration of the uranium drone into the held Ukrainian armed forces of Ukraine territory. So yeah, those basically most of the time achieve or hit their intended targets, and this has everything to do with dramatic decreased density of the Ukrainian air defense. But this is just beyond the point. This is not a joke. This is what they do on the front line, or for example, when Russians respond to all kinds of the traditional armed forces of Ukraine and NATO attacks on the civilian targets. But this is not what I want to talk about today, and I was going to talk about this for a long time, and periodically, considering the fact that I am present in the YouTube environment for the last 3 years at least, it makes sense to kind of elaborate more, in addition to what I wrote about 8 years ago, well, almost 8 years ago. And this is why I love internet. This is why I like to have those records preserved and to be able to refer to them and to demonstrate to people where I'm coming from whenever I talk about some fundamental issues of the applied geopolitics, let alone military strategy and grand strategy as exercised by the states, by the nations, if you wish. And I want to get you to what is called American realism. There are very many so-called American realists. They don't like neocons, but as most people in the United States who operate within this, I would say, pseudo-academic, but let's say academic environment, or if you wish, ideological environment, they think that they are realists, and I 8 years ago I said I had it. I had enough with this BS and this pseudo taxonomies and all kinds of the clarifications and classifications, because at some point of time you cannot take this anymore, because it is all about creating some kind of the it's just soap opera. It's those bubbles, so bubbles which anybody can just blow them, and that's it. After that there's nothing there, just hot air. And here is what I wrote long time ago. Here it is. As you can see yourself, this is the it was written on Thursday, April 20th, 2017. And here is where I write about why I gave up on American foreign policy realism. And so here it is. There are so many foreign policy realisms today in the United States that one has to keep oneself from nodding off while counting and naming them. And yes, as you can see yourself, I used the obviously famous gun cleaning episode from Forrest Gump with Bubba and Forrest basically, and Bob explains to Forrest how many dishes there are from shrimp. The same goes for this American realism, allegedly, which is against the neocons and all those, interventionists which are essentially imperialist foreign policies by the United States administrations time after time after time. And here I represent the famous Hans Morgenthau's lecture on realism from 1957. He was reading this at the United States Naval War College, and it was called, on the realism in foreign policy. And this is what he states, which is correct. And since then, it always defined everything what American realists think about themselves. I would say, and I have said many times before, that if the Tsar still reigned in Russia, that if Lenin had died of the measles at an early age, that if Stalin had never been heard of, but the power of the Soviet Union were exactly what it is today, the problem of Russia would be for us by and large what it is today. If the Russian army stood exactly where they stand today, and if Russian technological development were what it is today, we would be by and large confronted with the same problems within something which we confront today. Well, Soviet Union is no more. There are no Russian armies standing in Germany, in the Eastern Germany, and in Hungary or Czechoslovakia. Yet here we are. NATO is under basically Russian borders and commits war crimes and crimes against humanity on the industrial scale. And here is the thing which I write actually even longer than the 8 years. It's for a couple decades at least. You see, no matter what Russians do, such as technological development, unless they remain poor, undeveloped, uncultured people, they represent a problem. And this is what realism essentially was presented to, well, as, how to put it, for everybody's consumption, that, oh yeah, we're realists, we understand that the United States has to kind of behave only for its national interest, but consider others' interests. But in reality, all this realism is based on the simple premise that all nations are like animals. They fight for the supremacy, and as such you have to understand what is going on. And here's the problem, and I will demonstrate to you, here's the problem across the board, ranging from the political views to the history, of course, which the United States doesn't know, the history of the outside world. Most of it, not all, but most of it is basically made up stories, you know, about America's greatness and bringing the democracy. Even the situation with Vietnam War, well, there were many honest and honorable American historians worked on this. Most of these revelations about the atrocity which was committed against Vietnamese people actually saw the light primarily long after the war, and when there was already given the number of the years, for example, to Hollywood to elaborate on this nature of that war and spin it to a degree. Obviously, we're not talking about the classics like, well, Forrest Gump, for example, the war in this masterpiece, actually, in Vietnam War, is shown in a completely different, detached way, except for the, you know, the $1 million wound into the buttocks of Forrest. But if you look attentively, of course, on the, you know, Full Metal Jacket, or, you know, the Platoon and things of this nature. But if you remember, for example, like the Flight of the Intruder, it was kind of almost sympathetic to, which I understand, it's, you cannot deny that, to American cause too, in a sense that, oh gosh, poor our guys, you know, so we got ourselves into this cluster coitus, so to speak. But of course the situation is much different, and the history is much different. It's the same as the history of the World War II, for which the victory of which United States gets the credit, just self-proclaiming itself the solely victor of the, you know, the defeater of the Nazi Germany and Axis forces, with small, you know, sideways kind of side of help from the Russians. But reality, of course, is very different. And when we look attentively at why, for example, all those realists, and there are many of them, including people who I respect, one of the foremost realists, you know, one is Mr. John Mearsheimer. And I respect the guy. I respect the fact that he, you know, kind of made some kind of adjustments throughout his academic career, but he's a political scientist, despite the fact that he graduated from the U.S. Academy, U.S. Military Academy at the West Point. And look what he wrote at that time. I need you to remind you what he wrote in 2014. And this is just, it was the famous article in the Foreign Affairs, no less, the Establishment magazine. Establishment psycho, you know, whatever, you have the mental, you know, cesspool of the supposedly American intellectuals and American policymakers there. And it was, as you can see yourself, it was published on August 18, 2014, and in the September, October, whatever, the issue of 2014 of the Foreign Affairs. And this is where he wrote the thing which actually is in the foundation of this horrendous, well, not only tragedy, but the catastrophe which Ukraine, or whatever the remains of it, has become for the whoever people live in Ukraine and NATO. And here it is. Of course, some analysts might consider that NATO handled relations with Ukraine poorly and yet still maintain that Russia constitutes an enemy that will only grow more formidable over time, and that the West therefore has no choice but continue its present policy. But this viewpoint is badly mistaken. Russia is a declining power and it will only get weaker with the time. And this is in the foundation of essentially, it's bipolar, it's schizophrenic American foreign policy, and even when you get the right forecast and right definition of things, you're still getting out the very screwed up result. It's sideways indeed. And the reason I am absolutely appalled by why he started writing, and Mearsheimer, who probably, I don't know, maybe he visited Moscow a couple of times, or Russia. He obviously doesn't speak decent Russian. His friend, late Professor Stephen Cohen, who was one of the very few true Russian scholars, and even him having a very interesting kind of left-leaning Marxist view on things in Soviet Union. He died obviously at some point of time after the situation which developed in Ukraine after the coup d'etat, and that was his only source really. And those so-called American intelligence and analysts who actually are primarily frauds, they're shysters, they know nothing about Russia, they might speak Russian language, but they have no clue because they are all, without exception, are infected with the virus of American exceptionalism. It is like mental illness, is sort of. Very few people who are not, who have enough guts and integrity to look at things straightforward, when they arrive to the conclusions which are more or less correct, they are stunned by their own conclusions. And own conclusions are this, declining power defeated the combined West. I love records, and I want I want to get you back to what I wrote almost concurrently with the Mr. Mearsheimer. You see, this is the guy, and I'm not trying to, sort of, how to say it, promote myself, but this is what I wrote. It was in January, not the 7th of January. I believe it was 22nd or 15th, doesn't matter. I mean, it was January 2015, as I already stated that. But it is already issue of what did US lose in Ukraine, explaining this, but it is already clear that by falling to achieve any sensible political objectives in Ukraine and in Russia, and by this starting a massive global realignment, the United States sustained a defeat. What will be the consequences of this defeat? I hate to speculate, I just know that they are already big and that the moment of facing the reality is coming. My suggestion to those who are still making decisions, open and start reading War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. They will never do it. They will not comprehend it. I don't hold my breath though. The moment US handlers of their Kiev puppets conceive that Ukrainian army can win in Donbass, the stopwatch started. This is what I wrote 10 years ago, and now, once in a while, I have to come out here and say, oh yeah, you're still promoting yourself. No, I'm just comparing the records. Because actually what I do, and well, I make mistakes, make no mistakes, I'm not infallible. I have my own emotions, I have my own biases, I make mistakes, simple as that. But this is to demonstrate to what degree of essentially destruction of the, well, first American idea, the idea of Americanism, as Professor Brenner beautifully described it. You can go on my blog and look it up. And looking at all this, here we have the results which we need to start looking at. Well, it's kind of the new year. We still have to kind of make some kind of the summaries, I guess, and make them until the end of January, I think. So, but let me start with this. And this is, it's just essentially accusation of the inhumanity of Washington regime, which today does what it does. And look at this. SVR, Foreign Service Intelligence of Russia, Ukraine will soon lower the age of mobilization to 18-year-old. The decision to reduce the age, as you can see yourself, it's already January 3, 2025. This is TASS, Telegraph Agency of the Soviet Union, which still retained its famous abbreviation, acronym TASS. And so we have the decision to reduce the age of mobilization to 18 years in Ukraine has been prepared and will be made in the near future at the request of the United States. This is stated in the message received by TASS from the Press Bureau of the Foreign Intelligence Service, SVR, of Russia. The other day, Washington demanded that Vladimir Zelensky to urgently reduce the age of conscription for mobilization to 18 years. The corresponding decision in Kiev has already been prepared and will be made in the near future, the Foreign Intelligence Service noted. The Press Bureau informed that the West notes a decrease in Ukraine's ability to resist the Russian army and does not rule out the imminent collapse of the defense of the armed forces of Ukraine. So, this is a done deal. Here we are. Here is the so-called realism, if you wish. Well, obviously, it's not the realism of this nature, which, otherwise people would ascribe Mr. Hans Morgenthau to this realism, or Mr. Mearsheimer, who, well, in his work on liberalism still quoted Mr. Fukuyama about how liberalism defeated fascism. Yeah, all those Russians, they're always in the way, So, but here we are. This is a crime against humanity. The pool, the sperm pool of what could have been the restart maybe of the Ukrainian nation, if you wish, which is decimated by this war, on the orders from Washington and London, is now, well, about 300,000. This is 300,000 about 18 to 25-year-olds. Most of them are essentially children. I know what you are when you have the age of 18. And so what they have their, number which floats around is that there is around 160,000 they can mobilize immediately. You have to understand what it means. They will be throwing children against Russian pit bulls and, the best army in the world by a mile. And they will not survive. Most of them, they will be killed. And with it, considering the enormous number of Ukrainians who already emigrated from Ukraine and never coming back, most of them, you can look up those public opinion polls among Ukrainians, they're not coming back. They're staying in the United States, in Europe, and whatever. And, well, millions of them, some people say it's up to 6 million, which already immigrated to Russia, no less. Ukraine is not anymore 40+ million population country. It's essentially about 18 million. So it's probably the size, I don't remember, don't call me on that, but you can look it up. It's probably the size of Czechoslovakia during it being unified country, and it's definitely much smaller, twice smaller than Poland. So they will be killing the rest of the genetic pool of Ukrainians. And they will be killing it because they know. And, what can I say? That tells you everything you need to know about Biden administration, and you have to understand the, so to speak, blame game already has started. As my good friend Garland Nixon sent me yesterday. Yeah, let's take a look. We suddenly have this The Hill thing, The Hill, the establishment newspaper, who talks about that, hold Ukraine accountable for corruption, misspent aid. So we have James Durso, opinion contributor, whoever he is, writing this on the eve of the new year, that American shame is that the US heedlessly expanded NATO to the borders of Russia, and then after Russia pushed back, enabled and funded the cynical maladministration by the Zelensky government. Yeah, tell me about those, tell me those fairy tales that Washington didn't know what was happening in Kiev, which it enabled. which will go down in history as one of the greatest examples of waste and theft of Western aid. Well, it was mostly laundering. Not, of course, Zelensky government got itself a little bit of money, so to speak, on the left, but it was money laundering for DNC, Democratic National Committee, and some people say Biden family, and of course it was the laundering of the money for the military-industrial complex. And so he continues about this, what more? Ukraine casualties have permanently altered the country's demography and will limit its prospects for economic recovery. Absolutely correctly stating, but let me tell you, here they invoke again Professor John Mearsheimer. Mr. Mearsheimer is not specialist in Russia and Russia-related affairs. When he had distinguished Mr. Stephen Cohen around him, he probably had some good ideas, and even that was not essentially proper, so to speak, source on everything Russia-related. But then again, they suddenly say that still many brave Ukrainian journalists and officers have exposed scandals of overpricing, shoddy equipment, and embezzlement at the highest level of Vladimir Zelensky administration. I don't know what kind of shoddy equipment they are talking about, because at least for a year and a half, most of the equipment which is being used by the armed forces of Ukraine is of NATO origin. Be that old NATO tanks, which are Soviet origin, or from Poland, let's say, or Czech Republic or Slovakia, or let me say all this equipment, all this wonderful, Abrams and Challengers and Leopards, all those F-16s, all those Patriots. Guess what? It's not shoddy equipment, it's just the equipment which NATO builds. And it was completely annihilated with the huge humiliation of NATO, in primarily United States, but also with, remember this Leopard M2A, whatever the hell is this thing, the best tank in the world, so yeah, it's not the best tank in the world. It burns like the, Christmas candle really well, actually. And so if you look at this, and then you get into the situation at the front, yesterday they have the this data, which is, as you can see yourself, the military personnel killed. We are very, very close for 37,000, or 36,000 from the psychological mark of the 1 million casualties by Russia's Ministry of Defense. Extremely conservative estimate, not estimates, they count, they just report what they counted, which they could see. You also can see yourself that one of the Su-27s was shot down yesterday by Russian air defense, and there is another SAM complex surface-to-air missile. I don't know, it could be another Patriot, or it could be Iris, whatever the hell the thing is, it's just been annihilated. And if you take a look, well, let's go now to our good friend Marat Khairulin and take a look at something what is happening within Terezk. This is Terezk yesterday. So as you can see yourself, and again, you have to keep in mind, and you can go back to my blog and see my latest post about the situation with Russians essentially constantly storming fortresses, non-stop, because most of this, as you can see yourself on the map, is nothing but the urban or village area. It's all buildings. It's not a, open field or forest. It is constantly some kind of the construction type things, including the even the pits, which heaps, which are erected by as the result of the mining of all kinds of things, ranging from coal to what have you, to all kinds of ores. And yet, as you can see yourself, Terezk, we have that situation. And it's, as you can see yourself, also here Terezk is the kind of the cluster of all kinds of other type of the settlements, or not hamlets really, it's not even villages, small towns. It's cluster of the small towns, and Russians are taking them all. And that's Terezk, and they advancing, and soon Terezk will be in Russian rear, tactical rear, and eventually it will be an operational rear. And so there you go, that's what is happening there. And but before we go and wrap up the situation with me explanation what realism in the American manner is. And again, there are some people among those realists I respect, but I do not take it seriously, because in the end it's still American exceptionalism. Is the fact that which I need to bring up, and it was making the rounds all over the place. And you know what? Let me do one thing before we go there, but let me tell you that how the coping and butthurt continues when even tabloids such as the National Interest comes up with this thing, like a total loser, the M1A Abrams tank in the Ukraine war. It takes years to master an Abrams. The Ukrainians were given months. Obviously, it's written by the nincompoop who doesn't take years to master Abrams. It's just bad tank, plain and simple. It is not designed to fight in the adverse climate. And look at these tracks. My gosh, yeah, good luck, driving those on the ice or on the snow. But the point is, it is so complex, it is so lumbering, it is so heavy that, yeah, it became the easy target for Russian Kornet systems and Russian ATGMs, other types of the ATGMs. And the question is not about 2 years of mastering it. It's how you actually fight in the modern tank warfare against the enemy who is the first-rate army. You can't. And so here he writes this, whatever the guy who wrote this thing about Abrams, that he talks in the case of Russia, the 9M13 Kornet dual warhead anti-tank weapon is a nightmare for any Ukrainian tank. And here he makes this, it's coping, it's a butthurt, but he needs to, it's therapy. As much as the NATO provided Javelin anti-tank system is a problem that Russians MBT struggles to overcome. Well, I have news for him. No, Russians MBTs do not struggle to overcome actually Javelin. They struggle to overcome and doing it fairly well in, against the drones. Drones with the tandem charges of all kinds of including Kornet, stuck on them. That's the problem. Javelin, yeah, let's take a look at the Javelin record, especially when he mentions the Western strategist must answer why M1A1 Abrams has struggled to perform well in the Ukraine war. Well, first, there are no real strategists. Those strategists who are real strategists in United States, they are not allowed anywhere near establishment and have their competent views expressed. So yeah, what United States has as the establishment or court strategists, they are a joke primarily, so they will know what hit them because obviously they created this based on this realism and declining powers and not knowing what is going on, and especially not understanding, which would anticipate from the political scientists, what are the technological realities of the war of the 21st century. But to actually give some understanding of what we are dealing with, here's from Raytheon. Make no mistake, this is Raytheon. This is not some kind of Russian, propaganda or something like this. Look at that. Look at that. They already showed the so-called effectiveness of Javelin, which is less than that of the ancient TOW missile. But look at this. They said that 8 out of 11 shots missed by Javelin. It's in the most favorable conditions, and this is just. I have no words, and yet those people still go out and make those polls and make those studies, but not understanding that what they produced is actually worse than 1970s technology. And yeah, when you have the essentially what amounts to 20% effectiveness, actually in the combat in Russia, it's even less than that. What kind of weapon is that? And this is Raytheon study. Make no mistake. This is what they published themselves. Internal document, which was allegedly what they made public. So, and when you look at this, this is like, are you freaking kidding me? And they are talking about that oh yeah, Russia is declining power. My gosh. don't you want to compare actually what is happening? And well, yesterday, Garland Nixon, Scott Ritter, and me we spoke about it, and there is consensus between us. The war is over. The war is lost militarily. That is why, for example, they will be killing 18-year-old Romanian Ukrainian kids if they will not be able to escape Ukraine, which is, of course, happening now. Well, this concentration camp. This is democracy in Mr. Blinken's and Sullivan's idea of democracy, making the country concentration camp, which you cannot leave. But, so when you look at this, my gosh, what were those realists thinking? For example, 10 years ago, many of them, as I already stated, not bad people, many honorable people who were repeating ad nauseam how weak Russia is, how essentially not important it is with the economy smaller than that of Italy. So we have now the guy, and this was making rounds. Yeah, everybody's talk about it now. This is the level of the American Academy. This is Robin Brooks. Look what he says. Oh, first, the graph itself is garbage. I'm not going to go into that because it's fake. And again, the GDP, they don't understand basic things. But here it is. This is Mr. Brooks. He used to be actually the guy from what's the name of this one of those investment banks which was too big to fail. So, and here's it. There it says, there needs to be a ban on any academic papers that interpret Russian resilient GDP as a sign that sanctions don't work. Russia's resilience is a symptom of Western indecision on sanctions. If the West had gotten its act together, Russia would be imploding right now. Yeah, the guy is a loser. He would never be, basically all economics education, 99% of economic education, so-called education in the United States and in the West, and partially in Russia, it's now being kind of, rolled back. It's a fraud, it's academic fraud. It's all those stories about how great the GDP, American GDP is because, of course, it's, measured in dollars and most of it is not even industries. But here it is, the guy was actually from both Brookings Institute and whatever the investment banks, and that is why the United States is at this basically juncture where it is. So, is there any difference between, for example, this Robin Brooks and those realists, ranging from John Mearsheimer to other people I'm not going to name? John Mearsheimer came about only because he is a prominent figure. He also operates on all platforms, ranging from the globalist and suicidal morons from Council on Foreign Relations, publishing, all kinds of articles in that foreign affairs thing, to alternative media and things like that. But other than that, there are a whole army of them, believe me. Okay, I'll give you one of them, the responsible statecraft, Mr. Basevich, who also passes for some reason for realist. You have people like Anatol Limen, who he is basically, racist and moron, pardon my French, illiterate pretty much on any matter of the modern grand strategy. And, well, he is historian by education. Nothing wrong with being historian, make no mistake. But here they are. These are realists. And then you have this guy, and yeah, how about let's shoot those people, right? Those who write academic papers that Russian industry is roughly is comparable, bar some sectors like the commercial airspace, and that's the whole other story we will need to talk about. And let's say automobile industry, yeah, United States leads here by the large margin. But in terms of steel, in terms of the processing, in terms of producing all other, industrial equipment, Russians are roughly equal with the United States. So there you go. Russia produces 70% of the energy United States produces, with Russian population being more than twice smaller than the United States. But you cannot explain it to some Ivy League graduate on economics faculty who they have no clue. They are absolutely clueless. And as the result, we are officially nearing the 1 million casualties on the Ukrainian side. And yes, the war is effectively over, and that is why they are desperate in the White House and all Washington trying to throw children into the meat grinder. So don't tell me anything. anymore about democracy, morality, or ethics. Washington has none, zero. And will Trump do something about it? No, no. Mr. Nebenzia today, he comes out and says, yeah, repeats the thing which Russians repeat non-stop, that, oh yeah, there will be no any freezing of the conflict, there will be nothing what the Trump plan is, and he say Moscow calls out Trump team for waffling on Ukraine. And Mr. Nebenzia, Russia's permanent representative in the United Nations, says deal is US President-elect Donald Trump's favorite word. Everyone knows that. How this is consistent with Russia's interests is still unclear. These are some unformed vague signals of readiness for something. And you have to keep in mind that on January 17th, Russia and Iran signed essentially the military political alliance. And Russians are not interested in freezing of the conflict or in any kind of the postponement. If of NATO ascendance to NATO, there will be no NATO ascendance for Ukraine, because there will be no Ukraine if Mr. Trump continues to insist on what he's trying to present, those vague signals. I guess that's another American, basically realism at play here, right? So this is what I wanted to tell you today, guys. As always, those who like what I do, please subscribe to my channel. Those who can afford, please support me on Patreon or buy me a coffee or 2 or 5. And this is everything for today. Have a nice weekend, and thank God it's Friday. Bye-bye.